The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. JP Morgan agrees to pay millions of dollars in lawsuits over its dealings with the convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. President Biden to join workers on the picket line in Michigan as the auto strike continues. Plus, is art still a good investment? Good afternoon. This is Business Live with me, Ian King. JP Morgan Chase has this afternoon agreed to pay $75 million to resolve lawsuits brought by the US Virgin Islands, which allege the banking giant had facilitated sex trafficking of young women by the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, a long-standing JP Morgan customer. Well, under the settlement, in which JP Morgan admitted no wrongdoing, the bank will pay $30 million to anti-human trafficking charities in the US Virgin Islands. At the same time, JP Morgan has reached a settlement with its former executive, Jess Staley, who'd handled the bank's relationship with Epstein. Well, JP Morgan was demanding that Mr. Staley, who went on to become chief executive of Barclays, returned $80 million in pay for refusing to fully disclose the extent of his relationship with Epstein. Well, joining me now from New York is the FT's legal correspondent, Joe Miller. Joe, good to see you this afternoon. US Virgin Islands have been looking for around $190 million. I mean, on that basis, it sounds like this is quite a decent result for JP Morgan.
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, it puts an end to this incredibly damaging litigation that's been going on since the tail end of last year, so for almost 12 months now. And during those lawsuits, we've seen a number of damaging headlines come out about JP Morgan's 15-year relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, that there were several internal warnings about keeping him on as a customer. And of course, we have also seen Jamie Dimon himself, the CEO of JP Morgan, America's largest bank, being deposed for 7 hours and having to answer questions about the bank's relationship with JP Morgan. He, of course, said he'd never, with Jeffrey Epstein, rather, he, of course, said that he had never met Jeffrey Epstein and had really only heard about him in 2019 when the federal charges were dropped. So this sort of draws a line underneath all of that. And as you say, it's for much less than the USVI was originally demanding. The USVI is saying that it, in turn, got some commitments from JP Morgan to beef up its compliance procedures.
As you say, this has been a rare public relations setback for JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon. Do you think it will do them any lasting damage?
Certainly remains to be seen. There's been, as I say, a number of unflattering headlines, and not only have these headlines associated JP Morgan with Jeffrey Epstein again, but they've drawn in a number of high-profile figures at the bank who were found to have been involved in email chains and meetings about whether it was appropriate to keep on Jeffrey Epstein as a client. And those people, some of those people are still at the bank and very senior at the bank. And so while the litigation for now may be over and investors will be breathing a sigh of relief because they now have a cap on the potential liabilities, it's possible that there will still be questions not just from society, civil society and customers, but indeed from politicians in Washington as to what JP Morgan knew and when, and from regulators as to whether the compliance procedures that JP Morgan has in place, and indeed other banks like Deutsche Bank, which settled with separate victims, also banked Jeffrey Epstein, whether their compliance procedures are really as robust as they should be.
Now, we've no details on the settlement with Jess Staley. What's your best guess as to what's happened here?
It's unlikely that we'll ever get details of that settlement, because unlike the settlement that happened this summer, where JP Morgan agreed to pay $290 million in compensation to some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims without admitting any liability, that had to be approved by a court. And so details of that figure came out and where that money is going. This is now a settlement between JP Morgan and its former senior executive, Jess Staley, whom it had accused of not just participating in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, but of also lying, essentially misleading JP Morgan about what he knew about Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, these are all claims that Jess Staley denies, but we're unlikely to know how much he was forced to pay over this. Obviously, JP Morgan tried to make Jess Staley liable for the entire settlement to both the victims in the summer and now to the US Virgin Islands. That is not as some people believe that Jess Staley could cover on his own with his own finances, so it's unlikely to be the full amount. But time will tell whether Jess Staley decides to come forward and give any details of that settlement. For now, he's out of legal trouble when it comes to the lawsuit from JP Morgan, although of course questions remain over his involvement and his knowledge, and other branches of law enforcement could well be looking into his activities. That remains to be seen.
OK, Joe, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some other stories for you now. And the US President Joe Biden is expected to join a picket line of striking car workers in the next hour or so. Mr. Biden is expected to join members of the United Auto Workers Union in Wayne County, Michigan, in what is being billed as the biggest show of support for striking workers by a sitting president in at least a century. Meanwhile, the former President Donald Trump is also expected to address striking car workers at a gathering at nearby Detroit. Well, the UAW, which has 389,000 members, is yet to endorse a candidate for next year's presidential elections. Actors in the United States have voted in favour of potential strike action over video games. Members of the SAG-AFTRA union voted by 98% to strike should no deal be reached over the gaming industry's use of AI, threatening the work of voice, motion capture and stunt actors. The sector's been under pressure to reject AI from creatives as advanced models have shown promise in generating believable voices, script and animation. Strong demand for its detection systems and from its customers in the energy sector have helped the UK engineering combine Smiths Group to record earnings. The FTSE 100 company, whose scanners are used by airports the world over, today reported an operating profit of £501 million for the year to the end of July. That was up 20% on the same period 12 months earlier, with sales up in 3 of the company's 4 divisions. Now, 2 innovation consultancies that aim to transform the way modern businesses evolve have announced a major partnership. Emergent and Strategizer will combine to offer companies support in creating and delivering new products, services and business models. Well, joining me now is Alex Osterwalder. He's Chief Executive of Strategizer. Alex, welcome to you. Talk me through the industrial logic of this partnership. Oh, dear. Alex, are you muted by any chance? We're struggling to hear you. Right. OK. Alex, we'll try and get you back later. Yeah, we got you. We've got you. OK. You were telling me about the thinking behind this partnership.
The COVID world. Yeah. So, innovation is not a nice to have anymore. It's something, senior executives are really looking at. Surprisingly, they're not necessarily very good yet at how to implement this. And what's happening here with Strategizer and Emergent coming together is covering this full, end-to-end range of moving from innovation to execution. There's been innovation activities in companies for a long time, but the results haven't been very good, and research shows that. By bringing Strategizer and Emergent together in this alliance, we cover this range of innovation towards execution. So it's really covering this innovation gap. That's why we're excited about making this happen.
Why do you think this innovation gap, as you call it, exists?
Well, companies are really good at managing their existing business. They're geared towards execution. Exploring new ideas, it's something that we're much more familiar with in the startup world. It's closer to entrepreneurship. So what we need to build in organizations is this ability to explore and exploit at the same time. That means not neglecting the execution engine, remaining world-class at running a business, but at the same time, under the same roof, creating an innovation culture. And today that doesn't really exist yet. And often when companies try, these cultures are very conflicting because they're so different. The world's best companies that are really good at innovation, they bring this into their DNA. They have this dual mindset. We call this the dual mindset organization. world-class at execution and world-class at innovation at the same time. That's very hard to do.
Are there some sectors that are worse for this than others?
So the way I see it, looking into the market, it's established companies that have a hard time doing this. Some sectors had to do it faster. If you take telecom, because their business models were expiring, faster than, butter in the sun. So they had to do it. But it's really across the board. And some sectors are now, jumping onto this. A lot of pharmaceutical companies, they have to do this because R&D is not equal innovation. R&D is the technical part, but bringing, innovations to the market with value propositions that customers care about and business models that allow you to actually bring some of these innovations to market, that's the hard part. And that's where companies are really struggling.
Are companies struggling to understand innovators in their midst at times, do you think?
So innovation is something that has been around for a long time, but I don't think, a lot of companies have cracked this. And if you take Emergent, with whom we started this alliance, they've been really good at product management and transformation, bringing agile into companies and making companies autonomous running that. We've been really good at innovation. But what I realized when we started talking about this partnership with Alex Adamopoulos, the CEO of Emergent, is that these two worlds, innovation and the innovation department and people who are tasked with innovation, and the world of product management haven't come together. And leaders haven't seen this gap either. So if the experts, had to realize they need to come together to make this happen, obviously the senior leadership teams are only starting to discover this. They realize, if you look at the studies, 40% of CEOs say their business models are going to expire in the next 4 to 10 years. They don't have a viable business anymore. So they know they have to do something, but how to do it is a bit less clear to them. And that's what's exciting, is we now know enough to actually build these operating models to help companies innovate at scale. And the at scale is the important part, right? So innovation has been more a thing of luck, but now we can make that systematic, and that's exciting. I mean, we've seen, the strikes going on in the auto industry. Well, one of the things there is that we need to be able to innovate so that we can create viable organizations over the next 5, 10 years, so that we can keep jobs and create new jobs. So innovation is actually an almost kind of a moral obligation.
Okay, Alex, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you. Now, the art world has always attracted investors, but art fairs have had their shares of ups and downs recently. Earlier this year, the Masterpiece Art Fair in London was cancelled, with the organisers blaming Brexit and a decline in international exhibitors. Well, against that backdrop, the Association of Art and Antique Dealers Berkeley Square Fair opens tomorrow in central London. Well, joining me now is Freya Sims. She's the association's chief executive. Freya, afternoon to you. Give me an idea of the amount of business that will be done at this fair.
Well, the preview is happening right now, so apologies if there's any noise in the background, and then we open to the public tomorrow. And there is quite a lot of business going on at the moment. I'm walking around and I'm seeing red dots, which is always a very welcome sign for the exhibitors who invested heavily to be here. And they range from jewellery to furniture to pictures in what I've seen so far. So there's a lot of activity. What we tend to see at the beginning of the preview is the very serious collectors coming in. Given that we're in Berkeley Square, which, we're very lucky to have this as a destination, we're in quite an international spot of London. So there is a big mixture of voices. There's a lot of English clientele here, but there's also quite an international clientele as well in terms of the visitors here now.
What's been happening to pricing across the various categories?
I think it's interesting. The pricing hasn't, there's certain areas where things have really kind of taken off and some where they've stabilized. But I think, in terms of your introduction, it has definitely been quite a difficult, the combination of Brexit and COVID together has been quite a challenge, particularly as London and the art market generally is a global market. So the way that we need to trade and the way that our clients and our exhibitors or members work is in quite an international way. So I would say that, some areas, as I say, have stayed and continue to grow, particularly things like jewelry and gold and watches, and some areas of pictures where actually when markets are quite so up and down have very often proved to be a sort of a more tangible investment. And we have one of our sponsors here, actually, Investec, and also the Royal Mint. And we've done a series of videos very much about that, looking at art, looking at gold, and looking at sort of ecological investments across the way.
Freya, it's good to see you so optimistic, and not least because recently you were saying that the UK's share of the global art market had fallen below 20% for the first time. Have we recaptured that?
So I think it's very difficult because it's, you know, we're kind of in the middle of our cycle, but at the very beginning of the season. So in terms of when we're measuring things, we've got Frieze, and we've got a lot of auctions that happen. You know, this autumn period, this kind of back to school period, is also very much a back to the art market. So we won't really be able to release those figures until a bit later in the year and have a good idea. I think that where we've seen sort of things moving is that if somebody was going to sell in London, New York, or Hong Kong, they probably still make the same kind of choice on where that artist or designer or, you know, craftsman might be most relevant to that market. If we're looking at a European and London situation, it might also be about where it's easiest to sell, and in terms of moving those goods around as well. So definitely there are kind of areas where things have become more difficult in terms of the sort of movement of goods. But I think that London still remains really as well, not just because of the art market itself, but with everything that surrounds it. So the quality of our museums, the quality of our contemporary artists who are making, all of that is part of the ecosystem that you know, builds this market. And you know, we've still got some, you know, a very good creative sector, but we've had to work really hard to let people know we're open for business. And actually on that, I've got a meeting with the shadow cabinet tomorrow with some of the other trade associations, and we recently had a meeting with the current government a few weeks ago to really sort of talk about how we can make London and the UK, and actually not just London, because, you know, we really are across the nation from the different levels of dealers. It's important for us to know that we're open for business.
Very good. Freya, there's lots more I wanted to ask you, but we're out of time, I'm afraid. Best of luck with the event.
Come to the show. Come and join us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Still to come here on Business Live. We're going to have a look at how the markets have done this Tuesday afternoon. Don't go away.
We were fairly anarchic and fairly irresponsible, and we didn't give a damn about anyone else or anything else, and we just wanted to climb the world, and it was fun. It was just brilliant fun, and every now and then it went wildly wrong.
I ripped the anchor out, and then I fell 300 feet, 100 meters. I don't know much about what happened in the fall because I blacked out, you know, moments after it had started, and then I came round and I was in a sort of a runnel of snow, and I'd stopped facing downwards on my stomach. My climbing partner Mick Fowler was able to down climb to me because I'd got the ropes. But yeah, it was just a miracle, really. I stopped, and then the pair of us had to down climb, and I with my injuries basically. As it turned out, I'd broken 5 ribs and crushed 2 vertebrae. Mick went down to get help. Some people did come up to me, a rescue team, and they walked. I had to walk out then. Our food source was not good. We got this dehydrated, this freeze-dried food that had gone off basically. So we had to get rid of some of that. Then we were on half rations. We ran out of food. I had 6 days. Both of us did actually without food. I couldn't carry the rucksack because of the damage to my back. Mick tried to take it down with us, but it was just sort of getting in the way. He was trying to lower it on the rope and kept getting caught. So he thought he'd kick it down this sort of big snow slope and hopefully, you know, be able to recover it when we went down. But basically, we never saw it again. So on the glacier, we were without the tent and my sleeping bag. So we spent 2 nights sharing a sleeping bag as well on on the glacier.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Well, the pound has continued to drift on foreign exchange markets in the wake of last week's decision from the Bank of England not to raise interest rates. Sterling today hit its lowest level against the dollar since March the 20th. It's currently off 0.2%. The dollar, incidentally, is at a 10-month high right now against a basket of currencies. On the equity markets, European stocks have all finished lower this afternoon, with China stocks in particular, China-exposed stocks suffering amid growing pessimism about the outlook for there. Here in London, the FTSE 100 has just about finished break-even. Some of the big dollar earners have come to the aid of the index. The distributor RS Group is the leading blue-chip gainer this afternoon. That's on takeover speculation, while Barclays has finished more than 3% higher on broker comment. Outside the FTSE, Asos has dropped on news of a 15% fall in sales in the final quarter of its financial year, while the imperial leather soap maker PZ Cussons has slumped by 4%. Its results today have been poorly received. Lower down the food chain, Videndum, which supports the film industry, has finished down 36%. That's on a profits warning related to the actors and writers' strikes. Having sold off earlier in the session, the oil price has rallied this afternoon, though. A barrel of Brent crude will currently cost you $93.80 a barrel. That's up a little over 0.5%. With me now is Robert Ulster, Chief Investment Officer at Close Brothers Asset Management. Robert, good to see you this afternoon. Now, within the hour, we've had some quite important US data. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, that's right. We've had US consumer confidence data that's come at a 4 or 5 months low, and we've also had US new home sales also at 4 or 5 month lows. So you're seeing quite a big cooling, I think, in the US economy at this point. US house pricing also off about 2%.
It's very timely. The Wall Street Journal had a piece this morning where it said, is this the moment where US consumers feel the impact of all the rate rises? It feels like that's the case.
It does. It does feel as though perhaps the savings that people accumulated during COVID have finally unwound, that the gasoline in the US and food prices and rental and mortgage prices are finally beginning to hit, and the US consumer is slowing despite the sort of reasonably resilient labour markets. I agree.
And today we also heard from Ferguson, late of the UK market, now listed in the US, big builders merchants.
That's right, yeah, and they're seeing, they're basically exposed to half the residential market and half the sort of non-residential commercial market. And investors worried that the non-residential is going to slow. Everyone expects the residential, the housing market to slow, and that's what's showing from Ferguson's numbers. It's a high-quality company, good management, but there is a worry that from here on, non-res is going to slow.
Now, closer to home, we had quite a few consumer-facing stocks updating the market today. Asos was a bit disappointing.
Yeah, Asos, it's got a lot of moving parts, Asos. So, yes, you've had a very wet July and August, as I'm sure we all know, and that hit the clothing sales. Their full-year numbers likely to be down about 10%. But within that, there is a recovery plan going on with faster turnaround, shorter cycle fashion. They've taken a lot of cost out of their logistics business, and they've also discounted a lot of the inventory that was lagging them. They're better funded now. So within the mire of today's results, it looks like there is a profit turnaround going on, and we'll have to wait and see, of course, how the UK consumer progresses.
All right, Robert, I'm afraid time has defeated us. Thanks for coming in this afternoon. Good to see you. Well, that's it from me for now. I'm back at 11:30 tomorrow morning. If you do get a chance, though, to have a look at it, I've written for our digital platforms today about the warning signs that the battle against inflation is far from won. Do have a look at that. If you scan the QR code, you can look at that. All about the moves in the bond market lately. Join me tomorrow at 11:30. Up next, it's Mark Austin with the News Hour. Thanks for joining me today. Cheerio.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.